My dear Sauron, remember that one ring you made thousands of years ago? After Isildur failed to destroy it, the wizard Gandalf, one of the Astari, would call on a little hobbit named Bilbo to go on an adventure in the lonely mountain to reclaim it from the dragon Smaug. And indeed he did, albeit reluctantly at first, and found the one ring when he encountered Gollum, who kept referring to it as his precious, though Bilbo would not know that at the time. It would be seen as a magic ring, and he would keep it in his pocket while going about his daily tasks. It wouldn't be until long after he arrives home he would recognize the ring for what it is, though it was mainly what it could do for him. This time, Bilbo's younger cousin, whom he endearingly calls his nephew due to their 78-year age difference, Frodo, would be called upon by Gandalf to take your ring to Mordor. He adopted him a number of years ago when poor Frodo lost both his parents in a boating accident. By then, Bilbo would already have had the ring for 60 years and will mainly see it as a magic ring. He went to his 71st birthday party with it and used it to disappear as his final joke. Bilbo was just having his fun until the cruel wizard Gandalf decided to show up at Bilbo's home and tell him to give it up for his Frodo, just because he was 78 years younger, like a son of sorts. Bilbo was already used to the ring. He didn't want to give it up. But Gandalf would already have Frodo's plans in mind. Frodo was going to do what he could, try to find a way to Mordor and go as far as his strength of mind and body allowed. This strength would be given to him by Eru Ilúvatar, typically referred to as the One in the Third Age. First, Bilbo was going to Rivendell. Then at Rivendell, there would be a council led by the host, Elrond, who would decide along with Gandalf who would take the ring to Mordor, and it is up to us to stop him from his tracks. Bilbo would see Frodo for a few moments and the ring draped around his neck. "Have you got it here?" he asked in a whisper. "I can't help feeling curious. After all I've heard, I should very much like just to peep at it again." Poor Bilbo will be left alone to his own devices, except for the brief few days when he meets Frodo and Fellowship. He needs the ring to fulfill his desires when his son is out fulfilling quests. "I feel thin, sort of stretched," he would say earlier on, "like butter spread over too much bread." But little would he know he would get bored. Bilbo would be longing for the ring even years later, when Frodo will be well on his way to Mordor, with his fellowship of nine surrounding him. We must stop him from his tracks. We must stop Frodo from taking the ring to Mordor. It is your job, Sauron, to remind Bilbo to keep the ring. Remind him of all its benefits. It allows him to be invisible and crack jokes the way he did at his 11th birthday party. Speaking of which, it allowed him to live to be at least 71. Hobbits typically live to be about 100 or so, and Gollum, who possessed it before Bilbo, is in his 500s now. Bilbo has enjoyed it for 60 years, and the ring will unfortunately be taken from him by Gandalf, a member of the Astari, to be given to Frodo. And should the ring land on Frodo's hands, make sure Frodo knows where it came from. And should Frodo be brave enough to stand on top of the pits of Mordor, make sure he says the words, "I have come, but I do not choose now to do what I set out to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine," puts on the ring and vanishes. Oh well, at least we'll increase their lifespans. Your trusted comrade, Melkor Morgoth. My dear Sauron, I think you know that I was once one of the Valar and you were once one of the Maiar. However, the reason why I am no longer one of them is because the enemy, Eru, didn't like my music. I didn't like his either, so the feeling was mutual. Eru is considered the one, as in the one true creator of Middle-earth. From him I have been given power and knowledge, which I have decided to use to usurp the power of the children of our enemy. I first went off to find the imperishable flame. However, I could not find it. Unlike the Valar, I went off alone, and during this time, I was able to come up with music different from our enemies. See, our enemy, Eru, first came up with the setting of Middle-earth, and the first of the Ainur he would be creating would be the Valar. The Valar were interesting creatures. They would always do what our enemy wants them to do. I was originally one of them, but amid my solitude, I was able to come up with music that was much better and even more colorful than our enemies. His music was bland, while my music was colorful. I was finally able to give music some meaning is all. Later, Yavanna wanted the 2 lamps of the Valar, so she asked her spouse, Aule, with whom he worked with, to build them so she could plant more trees. After that, it was up to Varda to fill them with light. These 2 lamps were called Iluin and Ormel, and they determined the spring of Varda. Iluin stood on the north of Varda, while Ormel stood on the south. First, I overthrew the mountains, causing the forming of the inland sea of Helkar. However, as they shone for thousands of years during the spring, the Valar were able to live in peace. These lamps helped Yavanna grow the plants and trees she wanted to grow, and my brother Manwe had a feast as a result. Meanwhile, poor Aule and Tulkas were exhausted, as they were busy making the lamps Yavanna had them make to fulfill the will of our enemy. I was so irritated that the Valar were able to have their fun. I figured I could end the spring of Varda. First, I destroyed the lamps so Yavanna wouldn't have her trees, and to fill the realm of Arda with darkness instead of light. They like light, I'll give them darkness. How dare they enjoy the fruits of their works? How dare they have this big feast and Tulkas and Nessa have their wedding? So after that, I decided to sneak down to Middle-earth as Tulkas slept, and incorporated some servants, one of them being Autumna. I struck my first blow and the rest was history. The Valar wouldn't even dare touch Middle-earth after that. They all fled and went to Valinor. I bet you think that's the end of my story, but it was not. In fact, Ungoliant and I wanted revenge of the Valar in Valinor, using the strategies of revenge that I will certainly equip you with as you fulfill your desires for power. You certainly know Aule very well as a servant. With my help, you can rule all of Middle-earth. Rule on. Melkor Morgoth. Dear Lord Sauron, do you know what the Númenorians' #1 wish in life is? An even longer one. This desire of theirs would be the key to destroying Númenor. The more joyful was their life, the more they longed for the immortality of the Eldar. See, our enemy, Eru, has this idea that neither elves nor men are superior in dignity to the other, but we can't deny the fact that the elves have immortality, and that was something that the Númenorians want. The men never seem to have enough time to perform the tasks they meant to do. It is your job, Sauron, to convince them that they need to be immortal. Of course, the elves will want the mortality of the men as well, as the grass is always greener on the other side. Our job is to convince them of the latter. However, for the men, death is their fate, the gift of Iluvatar, which as time wears even the powers shall envy. Do you really think so? No, this was a choice that Eru asked them to make. However, they can make their own choices. Regardless, the Númenorians ended up having longer life than other men, though our job is to convince them that they were still settling for what was set upon by our enemy. As a result, the Númenorians were a special kind of men, sort of like imitation elves. Convince them that it's got to be the worst thing in the world. Convince them that as imitation elves, they basically do what the elves do, only to be told by the Valar they can't do what they do at the end, which is to sail west into the Undying Lands. On average, they would have thrice the lifespan of ordinary mortal men, but unfortunately, the fact remains they would eventually have to die. The Valar will be worried that they would eventually desire immortality, though they are also immortal themselves. Remind them of the latter. Our goal is to make them jealous of the Eldar and the Valar. Eärendil, the father of Elrond and Elros, was able to sail west. Remind them of his deed and urge them to use that to stand up to the Valar and their band. Convince them that it's cruelly unfair that Eärendil, who could potentially be their distant cousin, was able to go to the Undying Lands to seek immortality while they will not be able to do the same. Eärendil was an elf. Our job is to stand up to the Valar and make sure the Númenorians desire immortality. Elros would eventually die at 500 years old, which is the longest a Númenorian has ever lived. This was long for mortals, but cruelly short in the eyes of an elf. As a result, this line of rulers would start from him. Remember what the enemy said. But the Quendi shall be the fairest of all earthly creatures, and they shall have and shall conceive and bring forth more beauty than all my children, and they shall have the greater bliss in the world. But to the Atani I will give a new gift. Therefore he willed that the hearts of men should seek beyond the world, and should find no rest therein, but they should have a virtue to shape their life, amid the powers and chances of the world, beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else, and of their operation everything should be in form and deed completed, and the world fulfilled unto the last and smallest. He had convinced them that their gifts were different and equal. The elves' immortality and immense mortality were because that would be what they desired. What Eru didn't see, however, is that the men wouldn't have enough time for the virtues to shape their lives with their current lifespans. It seems almost a double standard to them. It is our job to convince them of that. In order for men to have virtues that would shape their lives, they would need to live longer. Convince them that Eru and the Valar didn't see the desire for a longer life coming until the Númenorians wanted it. Let's face it, Númenorians come from elves who were part of a special line that allowed them to choose their fates. Luthien Tinuviel decided to become mortal to unite with her husband Beren. She was the first to be given the option to choose her fate. This was her choice. She was part elf, part Maya, as the daughter of Thingol and Melian respectively. Then years later, Elrond and Elros would also be met with the same fate. Elrond would choose to be immortal, while Elros would choose to be mortal. Thus, the line of Elros began. Let me take a few moments to discuss the ban of the Valar and its pitfalls. This ban forbade the Númenorians to sail so far west from their homeland they couldn't see its coasts. Thus, they wouldn't be able to sail west into Valinor. By sailing west, they wouldn't exactly be able to achieve immortality. In fact, there's a possibility that quite the opposite would happen if they sailed west, as it was initially meant for the bodies of the Elves and the Valar. But we don't want them to know that. Our job is to convince them that it will make them immortal like the Elves and Valar by turning the Númenorians against them. While the first person to stand up to the ban of the Valar was Tar Atanamir, the most vulnerable one of all would be Ar-Pharazôn, who would be the final king of Númenor due to his desire for wealth and power. Much like me, Pharazôn would ponder long in secret. This was my chance to instill in him a desire for wealth and power. Another thing to note about Pharazôn is his fighting spirit. While the others were unsatisfied by their fates, their motives were all words. They merely just dwelled in their unsatisfaction and stopped speaking Elven tongues. Ar-Pharazôn is a man of action. He would be deeply moved by the tragic death of his father, Gimmelkad, who was 2 years before his 200th year, which is accounted an early death for one of Elric's line even in its waning. And we, as comrades, should convince him that he must take steps to obtain this longer life as his father died young. He wouldn't want the same to be happening to him. Like many other Númenorians living in his time, Ar-Pharazôn wanted a longer life, though he has a unique desire for power many didn't have or wouldn't have had as much of compared to him. Our job is to convince him that his desire for wealth and power could be achieved by going to the Undying Lands and breaking the ban of the Valar to seek immortality. Immortality means more time to acquire wealth and power. There's only one problem. Ar-Pharazôn is friends with Amandil. Amandil is one of the faithful, an elf friend, and as a fellow Númenorian he respects the ban of the Valar. The faithful and the king's men became distinct after the ruling of Tar Atanamir in 2251 of the Second Age, with the faithful accepting the ban and the king's men rejecting it. The chief issue is that Ar-Pharazôn will initially be the hardest to sway, despite being deeply moved by his father's short life. However, once we separate Pharazôn from Amandil, our plan will be set in stone. We will first separate them by convincing Pharazôn alone to follow your will, separate from Amandil. After you return, Amandil will no longer be part of the king's council. This can be achieved if you convince the king that you know what's best for him better than Amandil. Our next quest will be to set Pharazôn up with Tar Miriel, the queen regent of Númenor. Pharazôn and Miriel were too closely related to wed. They were closer than the cousins of second degree. This is a perfect scheme. We can convince them that it is not about their marriage as it is about their power. By having them wed, Pharazôn and Miriel will become king and queen. This makes perfect sense. Meanwhile, make sure Pharazôn as the king or Pharazôn the Golden destroys the White Tree of Númenor. The White Tree is the memorial of the Eldar in the Light of Valinor. This tree is named Nimloth the Fair or Nimloth of Númenor. It grew in the king's court in Armanelos and brought as a gift from the Eldar. Our mission is to make Pharazôn jealous of the Eldar and the Valar to the point where he believes the elves are the evil ones. How dare they have their immortality? One of these days, our Pharazôn will finally break the ban of the Valar via his ship, Alcarondas, the Castle of the Sea. This would end Númenor indefinitely. Rejoice! Your most trusted companion, Melkor, Lord of all, giver of freedom. Lord Sauron. Please take note of the hobbits. You know, those hobbits that will eventually take the ring to Mordor. The earliest of them started sometime in the Third Age. You have known about the men and elves for quite a while, which is why they were more likely to succumb to your power. However, the hobbits will not be so easy. Remember how hard it was for Galadriel to succumb to you despite her being an elf? It will be even worse with the hobbits, at least initially, but once you follow my plan, they will be so easily corrupted. Mwah! This is because they will be most concerned with matters of the Shire, their gardens, and their simple little lives. But have no fear, this is your chance, since at least one of them will be taking the ring to Mordor. Let me take a moment to tell you about the history of the hobbits. Since they are most resistant to your ring, they will be among the chosen ones. I am going to show you how this all came to be by telling you about their histories. They would find the men and elves west of Eriador, between the Misty Mountains and the Mountains of Lune, with a remnant still there in the Dunedain. However, such earlier settlements were long forgotten by the time of the hobbits. This is why, while you have already tried to claim the elves and men and have war with them, you haven't been able to reach the hobbits yet. One day you will, if you follow my lead. Just trust me, my little servant, especially since you came to me admiring my power. Not only are hobbits considered by our enemy the unlikely ones, but they also have their own little system. Unlike the elves, men, and dwarves, the hobbits even established their own land. The hobbits took the land for their own with the last battle of Fëanor with the witch king of Angmar, choosing their own chiefs, a thane, to hold the authority of the king that was gone. At once, the western hobbits fell in love with their new land, and they remained there, and soon passed once more out of the history of men and of elves. While there was still a king, they were in name his subjects, but they were, in fact, ruled by their own chieftains and meddled not at all with events in the world outside. In 1601 of the Third Age, the Valarhide brothers, Marcho and Blancho, went from Bree to Argaleb, the High King in Fëanor, crossing the Brown River Baron Duin, with other hobbits following them, passing the bridge of stone bows, taking all the land to dwell between the river and the Far Downs. They were asked to keep the great bridge in repair and acknowledge the lordship of Argaleb II. Thus began the Shire reckoning, for the year of the crossing of the Brandywine, as the hobbits turned the name, became year one of the Shire, and all later dates were reckoned from it. As a result, the years of the Third Age will be found by adding 1600 to the dates of Shire reckoning, which goes to show they have their own little world, the protection, if you may, from our wills. There are three types of hobbits: the Harfoots, Stores, and Fallowhides. The Harfoots were browner in skin, shorter and smaller, and they had more to do with the dwarves than the other two types. They started moving west early, going into Weathertop. They were most normal and representative, as well as the most numerous, and more inclined to settle into one place. The Stores were broader and heavier in build and lingered long by the great river Anduin and were less shy of men. They came after the Harfoots and followed the course of the Loudwater southwards and would dwell there for a short period of time before moving northwards. Lastly, the Fallowhides, such as the Tooks and Masters of Buckland, came afterwards, being the least numerous in the northerly branch. They were more friendly with the elves and were more skillful in language and song than crafts and preferred hunting. Since Merry and Pippin were Tooks and Masters of Buckland, they would fall into this category, the Fallowhides. Frodo and Bilbo would also, since Frodo is half a brandybug and Bilbo is half a took, which is why they would be so resistant to the ring. Sam Gamgee, however, would be partially raised by Bilbo. He lives in Bagshot Row and is now walking along with Frodo to take the ring to Mordor. Sam is also a vulnerable character, but in a different way than Frodo. Sam is a gardener. He worked for Frodo and Bilbo in Bag End as he lived down the street. Unfortunately, he eavesdropped on Frodo and Gandalf as they were talking about your power and your ring, so he will be going along with Frodo to Mordor as Gandalf will be too powerful as a wizard and a fellow Mayan. While they may be the most unlikely creatures who will always surprise our enemies, the most vulnerable one will be whomever that ends up being the ring bearer. Because you really slacked off when Bilbo had your ring in his pocket. You didn't show up for Bilbo when he went off to Lonely Mountain, which was exactly what Gandalf wanted. This is why the wizard of all the Istari would be picking one of them to take the ring to Mordor. He thinks that you won't be as easily swayed by the hobbits, at least not as much as Gandalf himself or even the elves and men. It would be worse than Sauron, one would say, if Gandalf took the ring to Mordor, as they would fight fire with fire, which is what we want to do. So this is why Gandalf appointed Frodo. And when he did and looked at the one ring in his hand, we reminded Frodo that he can't do it. We made him feel helpless on his way and showed him all the benefits he could have by just putting it on and disappearing, which he did at Bree. Another point of vulnerability is friendship and fellowship. Frodo and Gandalf both know he can't do it on his own, so they appointed a fellowship. This idea of a fellowship would be that Frodo would be the main ring bearer and the other characters would follow him and aid him along the way. The moral of the quest would be that they can't do it alone, and when Frodo is reminded of that by his comrades, I convinced him that he must go to Mordor alone, but Sam was just too stubborn to let Frodo go alone. Pippin wasn't supposed to be looking at the Palantir, though he did, which was why you initially thought he had the ring. In that sense, since you thought Pippin had the ring, he spared Frodo. But really, Frodo ended up being the chosen one, so now it is up to you to stop him from taking the ring to Mordor. Now, Frodo's already been out with his trusted companion, Samwise Sam Gamgee. He was an interesting character, and his main motive was to accompany Frodo to Mordor. When the fellowship broke up, Sam vowed to stand by his side. It might be difficult to separate the two, but I'll see what I could do. At the very least, I should appoint you to stop Frodo from taking the ring to Mordor. Let's jump back to the moments before that for a second, where we made our last attempt to separate a friendship. Boromir joined after his brother had a prophetic dream and sought help from their father. Boromir eventually agreed to accompany Frodo as part of the fellowship, though his main motive was to save Gondor. Boromir saw the ring. We convinced him it would protect and defend the realm of Gondor and his people. But would he really have done that with the ring? Obviously not. It was our greatest ploy, Sauron, to allure Boromir to the ring so much that he would take it from Frodo. This would not be the first time we would allure a character to a tangible object by breaking the bonds of friendship, their biggest obstacle to fulfilling my will. As we discussed before, you were able to break the bonds of Ar-Pharazôn, the final king of Númenor, and Amandil, the last lord of Andúnie of Númenor. That was what I feared would be your biggest obstacle, though you were able to convince Ar-Pharazôn the pitfalls of the Band of the Valar. What is friendship anyways? Friendship doesn't accomplish anything. Friendship is a fluke. Friendship necessitates giving up the most precious things in our lives. We convinced that if Ar-Pharazôn kept Amandil in their council, then they both would die anyways. If not, they both would die too. Our job is to convince that friendship doesn't accomplish anything tangible, is a fluke, and necessitates giving up the most precious things in our lives. If Ar-Pharazôn didn't cut ties with Amandil, he would not have been able to discover his desire for immortality. This is why one of our significant tactics is to separate the members of the Fellowship. My main tactic involves using your truest desires, highlighting their different viewpoints, personalities, and backgrounds, and desires from each other, and using said differences to pit them against each other. For example, we were able to separate Boromir from Frodo by convincing Boromir that Frodo didn't know what he was doing, and Boromir knew better than Frodo what to do with the One Ring. This was very easy to do for a hot second. After all, Boromir was a brave and skilled warrior who was loyal to his realm Gondor. Unfortunately, Frodo stuck to his plan, which was why he was chosen to take your ring to Mordor. Now that Frodo and Sam are well off on their way, our goal is to get Frodo into this cycle of wondering whether he should be even doing the quest anyways, and for him to potentially leave the quest. Make him forget all the ring nonsense. This is your ring. How dare he try to take it to Mordor? He might even throw it in the fire, ending anything you have with it. Fëanor didn't like when people bothered with his Silmarils and when I lusted over them. See, he thinks I lusted over them, but I just enjoyed them and wanted the Silmarils to take back my power over his. You will be similar. While it will be a bit challenging to get through to them, once you get to the ring bearer, he will become one of your own, if not now, right when Frodo reaches Mount Doom. He will already have gone through months of starvation and exhaustion to the point where he can't be convinced otherwise. It's never too late to stop them from taking the ring to Mordor, until it is. Ta-ta for now. Melkor Morgoth. Lord Sauron, do you know Fëanor? Maybe later we'll encounter more characters like him, but now he is the most vulnerable elf to follow my deed. Since Valar were not as easily swayed as they were good little creatures that will always do what our enemy wants them to do. He created the 3 jewels, the Silmarils, but they were far from the first set of jewels he made. They were just his most known. Fëanor was the mightiest in skill of word and of hand, more learned from his brothers. His spirit burned as a flame. But his case was not just about the Silmarils. It was also about his family line. As the only son of Finwë and Miriel, with Finwë's remarriage to Indis, this leaves Fëanor in the most vulnerable state for having thoughts against his new half-siblings. But this will take a while. First, I will have to cut ties between creatures, for example, the Elves and the Valar. Then, once an elf, Fëanor openly speaks against the Valar, then I would be able to pit the Elves against each other, especially Fëanor's half-siblings. After his mother, Miriel, died, his father Finwë later went ahead and married Indis and had Fingolfin and Finarfin. This is also another point of vulnerability. To cope with his disliking his new family members, he decided to start crafting, and he would eventually craft the precious Silmarils. However, the children were considered great and glorious, and if they had not lived, the history of the Eldar would have been diminished. This is because our enemy created the Elves to be abundant and immortal. Once I pit the Elves against the Valar, I will be able to pit the Elves against each other even within their own family lines. Fëanor doesn't really say much about the Silmarils though. It was a long and secret project, and he really doesn't want anyone to know. This is why he's the most vulnerable. Since he didn't want anyone to know, I was able to see them. They were nice jewels indeed. Those jewels would be strong enough that nothing, not even violence, could mar or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils, but is, as the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. In the inner fire of the Silmarils, Fëanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. For a while, I will pretend to complete the term of his bondage of dwelling in the Durs of Mondos alone. He will be granted pardon by Manwë and would have a brief moment of good. Though on a side note, Fëanor hates me now because he thinks I'm out to get his Silmarils. The Silmarils to Fëanor are prized possessions, especially since he made them, considering how strong they are as not even violence will break them. But they will be mine. I will make sure he also hates the Valar as well, which would really help in aiding the Elves against the Valar, especially as they really only enhance Fëanor's precious Silmarils, and Eru wants him to finally get along with the Valar. My plan is to do the opposite. Varda hallowed them, and Mondos foretold that the fates of Arda will lay locked within them. But we don't want to let them know this. My job is to convince them that the Silmarils were being taken from him by the Valar. That way, Fëanor will be convinced that the Silmarils were all his. Then I will be able to end the friendship of the Valar and the Eldar, since Fëanor is an elf of the House of Finwë. Then the Silmarils will be mine. Next, I will convince him that his half-brother Fingolfin will seize these jewels for himself, since, again, Fëanor loves his Silmarils. First, I pit him against the Valar. Then I pit him against his half-brother. See what I'm doing here? I'm pitting the creatures of Arda against each other, which is what you will see in all my schemes. See, our enemy, Eru, has this idea that elves, dwarves, the Valar, while they serve different purposes, they were all meant to live in Arda and bliss, despite being different in body and spirit. Our plan is to pit them against each other through lies and deception. First, I made sure Fëanor's true desires to keep the Silmarils. Then I lied to Fëanor, saying that the Valar are against him, to get him to speak openly against the Valar. Then, after he speaks openly against them, I finally pit him against his half-brother. This is because Fëanor always had his issues with his half-brothers, and after pitting him against his own family, the elves will start war against each other and start reaching for Middle-earth. This will leave all the power to me. Ta-ta for now. Melkor Morgoth. My dear Sauron, as you just confirmed, the Hobbit's name is Frodo. Frodo was told by Gandalf to have pity for Smeagol, and this pity will serve him at the end, especially since your ring is too strong for him or anyone to willfully destroy it. Gandalf has convinced him that few can make it, and Frodo was one of the few. Frodo tried in the beginning to let it go and still put that thing in his pocket. He is out with Sam Gamgee, his loyal and trusted companion. See, Sam is more of a representative hobbit than all the others, even Merry and Pippin. In the beginning, it was revealed Frodo's closest friends were actually Merry and Pippin, but later Sam came into the mix. This is because Merry and Pippin came from the same wealth Frodo has. Sam did not. Sam worked for Frodo and Bilbo, his gardener. However, since Frodo is the one with the ring, it was much easier to get to Frodo than it is to get to Sam. We also know much more about Frodo than we would about Sam, considering that Frodo will be the main ring bearer. See, Frodo without the ring is just like any other hobbit. As we have discussed, hobbits aren't exactly schemable, so to speak, when compared to the elves and men, for example. However, Frodo with the ring, voila! We could even continue stopping Frodo from taking the ring to Mordor all the way until the very end. Right before the Fellowship departed, Frodo and Gandalf had a conversation about your ring, and this is where they discuss the pity of Smeagol. Since his older cousin, his uncle Bilbo, would have pity for Smeagol, Frodo should too. This is why Smeagol is still around. There is a strange element in the world that is called pity or mercy, which Frodo is now experiencing. Pity of wanting to put on a ring and disappear. These are some of the greatest virtues defined by our enemy. While Frodo is the chosen one in the sense that no one else would have done the deed, the truth is he volunteered to take the thing to Mordor out of a thing what our enemies would call love. Love for his home and for Middle-earth. Little would he know, this is what makes Frodo the most vulnerable, as our mission is to keep him from nurturing this love for Middle-earth to make the ring and Frodo one of us. As we can see now, Frodo's stakes are unbearably high as the ring bearer. He's carrying your ring and is trying to fight against you when your forces are actively working. When Bilbo had the ring, he really slacked off, which is why he was able to merely enjoy it as a ring of invisibility. This happened at Weathertop, as Frodo wore the ring, despite being warned by Gandalf, possibly at the prompting of some of our enemies not to. After wearing the ring, he was stabbed by a Morgul blade, as they could see him clearly. And so would I. This is why Frodo is the most vulnerable character to mess with. As the ring bearer, the one who would be taking the ring to Mordor, this would grant him the most vulnerability to our schemes, one that gets closer and closer until he gets to Mordor, if he ever gets there. Gollum was originally named Smeagol before he got corrupted by the One Ring. However, under the Misty Mountains, he would find himself to still acquire both characters, Smeagol his good side, and Gollum his prevailing one, the one that lusts for the ring. While squabbling, he lost his ring and wanted to look for it, and Bilbo came. Bilbo asked a question, and Gollum started a riddle, which was promising for having Bilbo corrupted by the ring. However, that would nearly happen much later, before the cruel wizard Gandalf asked him to give it up. But Bilbo didn't want to kill Gollum and have the ring to himself, and Gandalf has now instructed Frodo to do the same. So right when they finally see him, Frodo now has pity for Smeagol. Sam would not have this pity, as he does not know about it yet. His main motive is to protect and stand by Frodo. That leaves Sam to contemplate killing Gollum. That way, Gollum will never be their guide. Sam doesn't consider himself to be heroic or even brave. However, this causes him to be vulnerable as well, as it also had an ingredient of pride and possessiveness, that of thinking he knows what is best for Frodo. This is what we want, and what we see in Boromir, but in a different way. See, Boromir thought he knew better than Frodo what to do with the ring. Sam, however, wants to leave the task to Frodo, but he is seeing Frodo and his pity for Smeagol and could learn from that. Never let him. If he learns from Frodo, that would make destroying the ring much easier. We don't want that. We want it to be harder for them. In other words, let Sam lean on this pride and possessiveness. Make sure he never sees and forgets any pity Frodo has shown for Smeagol. Now that Frodo sees Gollum, he pities him because they both have experience with the One Ring while Sam hasn't. See, when Frodo leaves Amon Hen, he says he's going to Mordor alone. But Sam says, "Of course you are, and I'm coming with you," and Frodo accepts. This is because Sam and Frodo knew they wouldn't be able to make it out alone. We must stop them. Despite having convinced Frodo he must go alone, Sam still comes running. One could say that Frodo was not made to be in this world, he was made to be in Aman, which is evident by his ring bearing. However, this applies to all the characters that they are meant to be in other realms, or life outside of Middle-earth in many ways, Aman or not Aman. Our job is to convince them that there is nothing else to come after Middle-earth and Aman. Should you fall, Sauron, Frodo would get all the honor and glory and be invited to go to Aman. With a ring, he can be invisible, live longer, and many more. Gollum has the same idea. He loved when no one could see him when he wore the ring. Gollum is already a wretched creature. He is in his 500s now, while Bilbo will be nearing 130. Most hobbits live to be 100. Sure, the old Took, whom Bilbo's trying to outlive, lived to be 130 without the ring, and Bilbo knows it, but we don't want that to give him any hope. We must keep Sam from reaching the point of pity for Gollum. However, it seems that this disagreement that Frodo and Sam have, unfortunately, will not be big enough to separate their bond. But we still have Sam and Gollum, but you will need to find another way. See, the point is not to side Frodo with Gollum. It's to pit Frodo and Sam and Gollum. All need to be pitted against each other. You need to pit all of them against each other, even Merry, Pippin, they'll be separated soon. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, for the sake of your ring. With your ring, that should be easy. As a result, they'll all want the ring so much that they'll risk their friendship to do so. That happened to Boromir. We convinced Boromir that he knew better than Frodo what to do with the ring. Unfortunately, due to Frodo's conversation with Gandalf, Frodo stuck to his guns, and he is now well off on his way to Mordor with Sam. Boromir died after defending Merry and Pippin, which we tried to stop. Our enemy would say that he died defending those he loved. See, as I may have mentioned before, our enemy has this idea that hobbits, different characters, are supposed to work with each other, not against. Let me explain. Frodo is the ring bearer while Sam will be by his side. He saves Frodo more and more as Frodo gets weaker, all because he's not carrying your ring. That way, when there come a time when Sam must help Frodo carry the ring, we can convince Sam to keep it forever, like we always do with all the other ring bearers. Remind Sam of the large garden he would have, and it is not merely a large garden. It's Samwise the Strong, hero of the age. Remind him of all the powers he would get and all the wild fantasies. Armies will flock to him as he would march to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. Since Sam is a gardener, his vision of great power would be a large garden of trees and flowers that brought forth fruit. Much like Bilbo, his ring of invisibility, and his 11th birthday joke, the ring promises to give more of what they like. Alas, Frodo and Sam will go through Shelob's lair, and Frodo will get caught by Shelob with the ring. That way, he'll be one of us now. He'll have the ring forever. But Sam will do all that he can to save Frodo, all the while figuring he would go to Mordor himself, throw it into the fire, and then come back to Shelob's lair to die with Frodo. Good plan! That way we can claim both Frodo and Sam. Both will become one of us. Sam will never throw the ring into the fire no matter what he says, thanks to your power. Since separating your bond doesn't seem to work, we will try other motives. Then, make sure Sam offers to share the load once he sees Frodo worn out and exhausted from carrying your ring, as he starts to be around it for longer. That will really trip Frodo up and separate the two, as Frodo's had the ring for so long and will be too weary and exhausted to see beyond your motives. This is the perfect moment. No, you won't, you thief. Frodo doesn't want Sam to be burdened with the ring. Make sure he knows that, so he would insist on doing it all by himself. The One Ring is not meant to be taken to Mordor alone. Sure, a single hobbit can be a ring bearer, as Frodo would be a majority of the time, but he would need to be helped by the other characters. The key is that Sam can help Frodo so much because he was not carrying the ring for nearly as long as he was. We convinced Frodo otherwise in the beginning. Frodo offered the ring to Gandalf, Aragorn, and Galadriel. However, they all knew that it wouldn't work out, so we were busted. And lastly, the thing about Frodo is that he's so complex to the human eye. He cannot be put into a box. All the characters we fooled, Fëanor, Ar-Pharazôn, even some of the other members of the Fellowship, Boromir, they all were easy to fool by the human eye because they already had their desire for power. Sure, Frodo wanted to save Middle-earth, though his task was a bit eccentric, the whole taking the ring to Mordor thing. Frodo might have been a challenge without him being the ring bearer, but by virtue of being a ring bearer, he would be much easier to fool. Mwahahaha! Maybe Frodo should think twice before accepting the task of taking the ring to Mordor. Your precious comrade, Melkor Morgoth. Dear Sauron, Gollum has your ring. He has now captured your most powerful one. This is great news. Meanwhile, Bilbo will be unfortunately taken out on an adventure with Gandalf and his company. Thorin and company, to be exact. Gollum is a peculiar creature. He would wear it until it tired him, and so he would keep it in a pouch and later hide it in a hole in the rock of an island. He would put it on when he couldn't bear to be parted from it, or hungry or tired of fish, which he loved. He would also creep along dark passages to look for stray goblins. Gollum is a hobbit, a Stoor, and he was born in 2430 of the Third Age and dwells in the Gladden Fields. He was kicked out of his own family's home by his grandmother as he took to thieving, muttering to himself, gurgling in his throat. But most importantly, he is already corrupted by the One Ring. Make sure it never ends. Make sure he keeps the ring forever. That way, one day, he'll be one of us. He loved when no one could see him when he wore the ring, and would often use it for crooked and malicious uses. Luckily for us, these are things that we look for. The more you wear it, the more you love it, just like he loves himself. Initially, Gandalf saw something peculiar in Bilbo. He would see it as just an adventure at first. But Bilbo didn't really know that he was going to go to Lonely Mountain. He thought he was just going to go out, which would be the best part of this whole journey. See, Thorin just doesn't want Bilbo going with him. Convince him that Gandalf just doesn't know anything. Gandalf will convince Thorin how great Bilbo would be as an additional member of Thorin and company. But Bilbo, he doesn't have any adventurous spirit whatsoever. Sure, he is half a Baggins and half a Took, which is what Gandalf tries to persuade him of, though really he is a Baggins of back end. He really doesn't know anything about his Took side. Gandalf will convince him of that. Our job is to make him forget it. Make him forget that he even had a Took side. Remember that Bilbo just doesn't do adventures. They just aren't his thing, you know. This is to their advantage, and to our disadvantage, since that would mean that Bilbo will one day grab hold of your ring, which is now in Gollum's hands. But do not fret. All we must do is make sure Bilbo holds on tightly to his Baggins side. After all, Belladonna Took never had any adventures once she married Bilbo's father, Bungo Baggins. Who wants to go on adventures anyways? Seems Belladonna just knew better after she married Bungo. See, Gandalf's idea, which could possibly also be our enemies, was that Bilbo had this Took side which frequently went on adventures, like a spark that's waiting to ignite. This was very unlike most hobbits. Most hobbits are living like Bilbo now in his Baggins side, as plain, quiet folk who have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner, but Gandalf sees that Bilbo is not just like any other hobbit and take him out on adventures to redeem his Took side. But we must stop him. We must stop Bilbo from going on adventures. He was right in the beginning. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. What does anyone see in them? How do we do this? Leave the ring to Gollum. He's so close to being one of us. One day he will be if Bilbo never touches it. We can continue convincing Gollum all the great things the ring would bring. Made him invisible, though that's only in darkness, so keep him in darkness. Never let him see the light, as the ring would make him invisible that way. He will only be shaky and faint. See, Bilbo doesn't know he will one day touch it, but that is our greatest fear. We'll remind him of how great he has it at home. Remind him that no hobbit has ever had to go on adventures before, and Bilbo wouldn't know where he would go. And how is he going to get along with dwarves? We spend so much time trying to separate the two. Not only those two, all need to be separate from each other, as we discussed. Friendship is a fluke. Friendship doesn't accomplish anything. Friendship is the ultimate killer of our wills. As you remember, the elves and dwarves didn't really like each other for a while. See, they did in the first stage, but highlighted their differences so they didn't like each other in the second age. They have settled their dispute, but still, the fact remains that they haven't fully resolved it, and we are not planning on doing so anyways. Same with Bilbo and the dwarves. What use does he have going with them? Should Bilbo go, make sure that he gets as close to the ring as possible. No one would take the ring to Mordor that way, but even if he does, it would be so easy, as you are the ring's maker. Much like me, you can use your power to control other characters, including Gandalf. Gandalf is a Maya just like you once were. However, you have the ring. You are the ring's maker. This increases your power. Do what I say and you should always have the upper hand. Not even hobbits can come close to you. See, Gandalf is quite an interesting creature. He seems to try to find the most unlikely people to meet up, knowing that friendship and community is the way to go in destructing our deeds. He values virtues such as compassion, community, and integrity. Our goal is to destroy all of that. Much like yourself, Gandalf is one of the Mire, an immortal spirit in visible physical form. He dwelt in Lorien, but learned things like pity and patience from the Vala Nienna, the Lady of Pity and Mourning. See, he really has much more in common with you and I than anyone would think. The chief difference is that their roles are designed so they could follow the will of our enemy. Gandalf will later be known as Mithrandir of the Council of the Wise, as the most vigilant and closest in council with the elves, especially Elrond. However, our shadow returned during then, and Saruman learned about the Rings of Power. We were able to darken their hearts. See, Gandalf and Elrond were fooled for a hot second. Gandalf was able to use his dark thoughts to gather all the rings into his hand to master you. He thought he could fight back, though that would fight fire with fire. That was why he would later turn to hobbits. But let's go back for a minute. When you finally arose, Sauron, you were close to declaring yourself. You almost had Rivendell. Gandalf didn't know what was happening, so he meant to call upon Bilbo and would meet Thorin by chance in Bree. They would go to Thorin's halls to discuss destroying Smaug before going to the Blue Mountains. Thorin was a little skeptical, which was to be expected. He was a little more focused in reclaiming the treasure of his forefathers. By then, Gandalf had already formed Thorin and company but thought to add Bilbo to go to the Lonely Mountain. He had been intrigued by Bilbo since his childhood, as Bilbo had stayed in Gandalf's mind ever since, with his eagerness in his bright eyes and his love of tales, and his questions about the wide world outside the Shire. He tried to visit Bilbo many times, who was often off visiting the dwarves. So, Gandalf would go back to Thorin to ask him to let Bilbo come along with him, but Thorin was suspicious, thinking he was soft, as the mud of his Shire, and silly. This will lead to our greatest plan. But unfortunately, Gandalf says, if Bilbo goes with Thorin, he will succeed, if not he would fail, leading Bilbo to be thrust into the hole of going on adventures. So now, we really don't have a chance. Bilbo will be going on this adventure to reclaim Lonely Mountain regardless of our efforts to stop him. Thankfully, it was only revealed that he would merely go. It was not revealed to Bilbo what he would do there. So, Bilbo doesn't know he was going to approach the One Ring. And when he captures it, he doesn't know that's your ring. Because the ring is now with Gollum in the Gladden Fields physically, though its powers went with you, its maker. So, we only have one final choice. To wield your ring to make Bilbo claim the ring as his own, much like what we did to Gollum.
My birthday present,
Gollum would say, referring to it.
It came to me on my birthday, my precious.
This was what he always said to himself, which is the opposite of what good hobbits do on their birthdays. And lastly, speaking of which, we convinced him that Deagle's gift was insufficient, that Smeagol would want the ring. It was said that hobbits give gifts on their birthdays. They claim that the gift is a form of thanksgiving and a recognition of service rather than a mere custom. Is it really, though? No, Bilbo would give gifts to Lobelia of all hobbits, who would only come back and try and steal his spoons. Granted, it was revealed later, but he has been doing this for a while. We figured, in what universe we have any interest in doing that? So we set Smeagol free so we can convince him he was special among the hobbits, having this birthday present to himself, the One Ring. Is it really his birthday present? No, it's still your ring, and it will always be. The hobbits can't get near you. They don't even know what's going on. Your precious comrade, Melkor Morgoth. Lord Sauron, today's the day. I'm going to show you how to deceive the Eldar. There are many elves in the region or Holland who will be deceived. The Eldar are interesting creatures who were made shortly after my captivity. At this time, the Valar were already in Valinor, and they would hold council after Yavanna slept. She was upset after I ended the spring of Arda, so she set asleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but should wait for a time of awakening that yet should be. Meanwhile, I built my strength before gathering my demons, the Balrogs, in Autumno before making a fortress. That way, my realm can increase and spread southwards as well. At the council of the Valar, it was revealed that they foresaw the coming of the Firstborn, which the Elves were then called, and then Varda would create new stars from the vats of the tree Telperion. One of the stars, Melkor, was the one showing that would signal the awakening of the Elves in Cuivienen, the Water of Awakening, and they were mostly very happy. However, there were some whom I ensnared and were unhappy and went to prison. So I bred the orcs in envy and mockery of the elves. That life and would become the bitterest foes. Our enemy, Eru, hated everything I've done, but this was just about the worst thing I've done in his eyes. Rejoice! You may think it is all for show, but it was far from that. How did this happen? See, I was the first one that was aware of the Quendi. Thus, any elf would vanish if they strayed far abroad. My biggest fear was the coming of the Valar Orme, so in order for him not to come, I sent my dark servants as riders and sent dark spells to convince the elves how terrible it was. See, the main issue with Orme was that his coming will signal the coming of the Firstborn, which I actively tried to avoid. Fast forward to now. It is the Second Age, and you will have the One Ring and be the most powerful when wearing it. The elves have the rings too. They want to resist your power, so they took the rings off in your presence. Unfortunately, Galadriel wasn't so easy since you tried to strip her and her husband of their authorities. They won't even dare face you head on, as they established a realm in Lorien. But look at Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor is still with you, and he is the grandson of Fëanor, who prized his Silmarils above all else. He followed Fëanor into exile after his death. The only issue is that Celebrimbor is friends with Galadriel and Celeborn, and the elves of Eredrian were great friends with the dwarves. We must stop this. Thankfully, you have your disguise too. You are Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Also, another thing to note is that Celebrimbor is wholly unaware of you. He won't know you will be forging the One Ring, but due to his friendship with Galadriel, he might not be so easy as he might have learned from them. But thankfully, as Galadriel is gone, Celebrimbor will be easy to fool. Start forging the One Ring. It must be a master ring and rule out all the lesser rings the elves have made. Make sure it can control all those who wear the other rings, and wear it, as the elves won't wear them in your presence. They will be so afraid. Your trusted comrade, Melkor Morgoth. P.S. While Celebrimbor was easy to fool at first, watch out for him still. He will craft the 3 rings. Also watch out for Elrond. He is already beginning to establish a realm in Imladris.